Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. On this video I will be showing you how simple it is to pressure can meat for long-term storage. And in this case I will be using pork shoulder butt that I purchased at Costco. I will be showing you how I put away meats for the short or medium term by preparing it for the freezer. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, there is a process that you can take that will make your meat taste better and store better when you put it in the freezer, and I will be showing you that. And I will also be cooking a delicious meal with some pork that I pressure canned about 5 years ago. Why? Because I want to show you that it's still good to eat after 5 years, and hopefully you will become motivated to do your own. I hope that you are having a great start to your week, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining in, and let's get started. Please remember that what I am showing you is how I do this, but I hope and recommend that you do your own research so that you can be comfortable during your experience with pressure canning. As you can see, I am starting out with about 15 pounds of pork that I will cut up into manageable cubes, which I will then stuff into quart mason jars. The method that I'll be using today is the cold packing method, which simply means that I will be packing the meat into the jars in the raw form. I actually believe that pressure canning meats is the easiest thing to can for anyone that is starting off. And it's the thing that most people, in my experience, are afraid of pressure canning when they are starting off. I always recommend that if you pressure can meats for the first time, that you always open a jar of the processed meat and make a meal with it. This way you can see firsthand how delicious pressure can meats are, and you'll be hooked, ladies and gentlemen, I guarantee it. I've used this method of cold packing for beef, for chicken, sausage, pork, as you can see here, and even fish. And I've never had a jar go bad. And for those of you that may be wondering, the opposite of cold pack, of course, is hot packed, which just means that prior to packing your meats in the jar, instead of packing it raw, that you're first going to cook the meat. I've done both, and I prefer both methods for different types of meats. For example, I've found that when you cold pack, that the texture of the meat comes out a little bit crumbly, kind of like the meats that you buy at the store that already come in a can, like for example the beef that comes in a can at Costco. However, when you hot pack or cook the meat prior to packing it in the jars, the meat then has a texture that is more like pretty much freshly cooked meats. And ladies and gentlemen, I challenge you to try to make a batch of each. It's not difficult, as you will see on this video, and that way you can see which kind you prefer. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is some really good looking pork. I know some people are going to say you shouldn't eat pork, but you can process whatever kind of meats you fancy, ladies and gentlemen. One thing that I wanted to point out here is that you haven't seen me trim away any of the fats, and I believe that the fat has a lot of flavor, so I never trim it away. I always put it in the jar. The things that I'll be using today, ladies and gentlemen, you can pretty much get anywhere. There is a small startup cost to pressure canning or canning, period. However, I believe that the benefits outweigh the cost in the long run. I went ahead and left a list of all of the things that I'm using today on the right hand side here, so that you can go ahead and take a screenshot of this if you'd like to start your own pressure canning endeavors. Now here you just saw me put some of the lids in a pot with a little bit of water that I'm going to go ahead and warm up before I actually put the lids on the jars. And although it states on the box with the new lids that you no longer have to do this, I do it as a force of habit, and I still like doing it. I've always had good results doing it this way, so I'm going to keep doing it the way that I've done it in the past. You can see here that I'm just going to go ahead and start packing these meats into my jars. If you have a funnel, ladies and gentlemen, that's great. I have no problem doing it this way. It works well. And also, I've been told several times, don't leave any air gaps. Don't leave any air gaps. Ladies and gentlemen, if you leave a little air gap here and there, in my opinion, it's not going to be any problem whatsoever. And we'll see that in the end result when this is all done. What I'll do later on is I'll grab a spoon with a wooden handle, and I'll go ahead and poke a little bit of this meat down some more to try to get rid of all of these little air gaps. But you're not going to be able to get rid of all of the air gaps. And in my opinion, as long as you allow the pressure canner to naturally decompress, you're not going to have any problems if there's any air gaps in there at all. Okay, so don't be very OCD about this, is what I'm getting at. I'm just about done cleaning the rims of these jars. You got to make sure that they're nice and clean, ladies and gentlemen. That is key. And take a look at this. This is how much meat I have left over. I figured that we would have roughly a pound to a pound and a half of meat left over, because that was a 15, almost 16 pound butt. And these jars usually take about a little over 2 pounds each. And this is the spoon that I used in order to make sure that I got as much air gaps out of there as I could. And now this is a step that you always want to remember. Make sure that after the rim of your jars are nice and clean, that you go ahead and do a nice pass with some white vinegar. What this is going to do is going to act as a disinfectant and also catch any little microparticles that you may have left behind when you initially clean the rims. That way your lid is going to have really good contact with the rim of those jars, and that's going to help to make sure that you maintain and get, first and foremost, a good seal. Now this step is 100% optional, and in my opinion, it matters not what type of salt you use. I personally like to use either sea salt, Himalayan sea salt, or Redmond salt, which is my new favorite salt to use in everything. Whenever I'm doing a quart jar, I usually use like a full teaspoon of salt, but I've knocked it down to a half a teaspoon. We'll see how this works out. You can always add more salt, but you don't have to put any salt in here whatsoever if you don't want to. My idea is that I want to keep it as clean as possible, meaning without as many flavors as possible. That way I can use this meat for whatever I want. Now you can see that I'm putting my lids on here, and when you put them on, it's very simple. I'm using the little magnet stick so that I don't burn my hands in the hot water. You don't have to have that. You can drain the water from the pot if you want, and then just grab them with your hands. Just make sure that your hands are clean. That way it's sanitary. But also you want to make sure that when you put on your lids, as I'm doing right here, that you do not over tighten the lids. You'll notice that once I get my lids on, I'm giving it about a quarter of a turn, if not a little bit less. It's pretty much to touch. You'll get to know it once you've done it a few times. But I'll give it about a quarter turn once I've got it on there, and that's it. You do not want to over tighten your lids, ladies and gentlemen. That will be a big fail if you do. Once I get my lids on, it's time to go ahead and put these bad boys inside of the pressure canner. This is not a must, but you can put a little bit of white vinegar inside your canner, especially if you have hard water, in order so that your jars don't come out with a milky film around them. Now, AP, how much water do you put inside of your jars? Well, my pressure canner takes about 1 gallon, but you will see that I don't really measure it by the gallon. What I do is I put enough water in here so that it can go up to about 1/3 to 1/2 up the jars that are already inside. So as you'll see, when I put my last jar in there, the water level is going to be about halfway up the height of the jar. It's very important, ladies and gentlemen, that you follow the instructions for your canner, because you do not want your canner to run dry of water while it's processing. It can cause some big problems. At the very least, it'll probably ruin your canner because it'll warp it. This T-Fall 22 quart is my favorite pressure canner, believe it or not. It's very simple to use. This right here is your weight. It's what I call a mechanical weight. You can see that it's got the number 3, 2, and 1, and each of those signify a difference of 5 pounds in pressure. So the number 1 is 5 pounds, the number 2 is 10, the number 3 is 15 pounds. Now that little drawing next to the dot that looks like a little ball of steam is just the open position. I always pressure can on number 3, meaning on 15 pounds, no matter where I am. Why is that? Because, ladies and gentlemen, that's what they use to pressure can in a factory setting. In factory settings, they always pressure can at 15 pounds, no matter where they're at. Why? Because 15 pounds of pressure produces about 250 degrees Fahrenheit, which pretty much eliminates any bacteria that there may be in your product. So if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me, and it's never failed me once. Now, once the lid on your pressure canner is secure and you turn on your flame, you're going to make sure that your weight is off or that your weight is on the open position, and you're going to wait until steam is coming out of it at a fast rate. At that point, you're going to start your timer for 10 minutes and wait for that timer to go off. Then you're going to set your weight at the amount of pressure that you want. Once you reach that amount of pressure, ladies and gentlemen, or the pressure that's recommended for your elevation, you're going to start your timer back up for another 10 minutes. Once you maintain the appropriate pressure for that 10 minutes, you will then start your timer for either 90 minutes or for 75 minutes, depending whether you're doing quarts or pints. I'm doing quarts in this instance, so I'm going to go ahead and start my timer for 90 minutes. I always add an additional 5 minutes, so I'll be starting my timer for 95 minutes in order to let this process. And take a look at our new puppy. We have found a name for her, and her name is Lulu Addison Prepper. So this is Lulu, and she is a little ball of fire. She loves to play, and she is a very healthy puppy. And although Karma and Dog are still not used to her, I think they're going to be great sisters. Now, while that pressure canner does its job, I wanted to share with you how I put away meats for medium term, not necessarily long term. So what you're looking at here is a slab of meat that I purchased from Costco, and in case you don't know, it's a lot cheaper to purchase it by the slab than to purchase it already trimmed out. So what I do is I bring my slab home, I trim it out, I cut it in the portions that I would like, and then, ladies and gentlemen, I salt it as if I was going to cook it right away. Once I salt it, I put it in the refrigerator so it can air out, or dry age as it is called, for a few days. In this case, the meat's been in the refrigerator for about 3 days. What that does is it makes it more tender, it dries it out a little bit, i.e. dry aging, and I truly believe that it makes it taste a lot better. Some people don't like aged meats, and I don't if it's like a month or so, but 3 days to a week, I think it's perfect. What I do next is I'm just going to go ahead and vacuum seal these in the portions that we require in order to cook a meal for a family. There's 3 of us. These steaks aren't that big, so we're going to be putting 3 steaks per bag into the freezer. This will allow me to go ahead and rotate through the other steak in the freezer that I have already dry aged and it not get freezer burn. I'm going to show you some steak that I had in there from our last processing of steaks, and you'll see how perfect they look. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is as simple as it is. I personally believe that you can even put this steak in the freezer in this method for up to a year, if not longer, as long as it's been frozen the entire time I've eaten meats out of my freezer that were more than 2 years old. Absolutely nothing wrong with them because I put them away using this method right here. Now back to our pressure canner. It's been done for about an hour. So as soon as I heard the timer go off after 95 minutes, all I did was turn off the flame and I let it sit there until it does what I call naturally decompress or naturally depressurize, meaning that I'm not going to help the pressure inside subside by putting the manual weight to a lower weight and lower weight. I'm going to let it do it naturally. Then I'm going to go ahead and open it, making sure that I don't get a face full of steam. And look at these jars, ladies and gentlemen. They look like they're perfect. Now you have to understand that these jars are still processing. So when you take them out of the canner, you have to be very careful that you don't tip them. Keep them straight up and down, and make sure that you put them on a surface that's not going to have a big temperature differential between the jars and the surface. I like to use a towel with a piece of wood under it. That way I make sure that these jars are not going to hit a surface that's cold, which will then make them crack. Another thing that you want to make sure is that you don't have like a cold draft somewhere with a cold stream of air coming into these jars, because that can make them crack as well. I am going to carefully place these on this surface, and then I'm going to let them finish doing their job for the next 18 to 24 hours, ladies and gentlemen. So tomorrow I'm going to come back and make sure that these are all sealed. I'm going to wash them up, and then after that I'm going to show you a couple of jars of pork that I pressure canned roughly 5 years ago, and we're going to make a very tasty meal with it. As I stated previously, I pressure canned this pork in 2019, and as you can see, it looks great. I'm going to be making a simple meal of pork with onions, a few seasonings, and some of these black beans that I purchased on sale a few payday preps ago. And I'm also going to rehydrate some arroz con gandules that I made, I think about a little over 2 years ago now, and I freeze dried. Let's see how that reconstitutes and how it tastes as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise you that this is the pork that came out of those jars. For some reason, the footage that I captured with me cutting the onion up and getting the pork out of the jars is not in my camera, so I'm guessing that I never turned it on. But this is the pork, and this is about half of a large onion, just chopped up nice and fine. And like I said, this is a very simple recipe. All I'm doing here is allowing this to come to kind of a boil or a simmer, adding some sazon Goya in addition to a little bit of adobo. Then I'm going to let this reduce down until the meat is kind of like pretty dry. Kind of like that right there. Now we're going to go ahead and grab our rice off the stove. And ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know how to cook basic white rice, I've got a video on that. It is very simple to do, and you definitely want to know how to cook it now before you need to cook it during some kind of a crisis. And all we need to simply do with these beans is just warm them up, ladies and gentlemen. In addition to that, we're going to go ahead and rehydrate the arroz con gandules that I freeze dried a couple of years ago, and we're going to put our plate together. Let's see how it comes out. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how you can be eating after the apocalypse. In all honesty, this looks very good, and I'm sure it's going to taste very good once I give it a taste test. Just take a look at how that pork came out. It looks delicious. I didn't tell you this, but I did go ahead and put a little bit of guacamole on the side. Why? Because it goes great with this dish. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining in. I truly do hope that you try this, because let me tell you what. It's delicious, and I knew that it would be. Have a great day. God bless every one of you. God bless America. I'm Alaska Prepper, and I'm out.